Greetings. This is Low Gelder, and this is another installment of Let's Talk Consciousness. And in brief, before I get into the actual subject, just a recap of what the point of this all is, in case this is the first one you're running into. I am trying to go through various life situations that prompt me to basically learn something about myself, and all through the lens of improving the quality of your consciousness and taking for granted some of the Eastern ideas of reality, that consciousness is reality itself, and that what we experience is something like a dream or manifestation of consciousness, for the purpose of um, having an experience, some sort of experiential learning. So, if that's the idea, if this is a conscious experience that we're cooking up to learn something about ourselves, to go through difficult and enjoyable experiences and a full spectrum of experience, um, if that's the case, it's pointed me in the direction of learning um, to forgive myself and others, to aim towards loving everyone unconditionally, and thinking of that as sort of the guide to improving the quality of my consciousness. So, with that framework in mind, the topic that I've already brought up and just felt like I've got more grist for the mill, or more things to discuss, having to do with looking at others who you disagree with, and recognizing basically that you're fundamentally the same, that you're worthy, that they're worthy, that despite your different point of view, I'm kind of thinking of this mostly in the framework of like politics, because I found myself lately watching people on the far left and on the far right approaching, disagreements and how they do it. And I mean, by and large, the overwhelming impression I have is, regardless of which side you fall on, the most vocal of either of those points of view, uh, generally, I don't want to cast too wide a net, but generally look at the people on the opposite side of that issue as somehow subhuman, or um, an enemy, and a group that some sort of action should be taken about. And I know that sounds pretty basic. If you look at the civil rights movement, I mean, that would be a description of people in the civil rights movement, that they would have looked at um, the institutions that were holding them back, and protested against them. But I think the important thing was, like, if you're looking at Martin Luther King, or further back Gandhi, the real backbone of what they were doing is that they were not being violent. They were advocating love and forgiveness of the people that they opposed, in terms of the issues that they opposed them on. But they didn't turn to hate, and that's the biggest thing. And I think today we have a real lack of that in the most vocal conversations. Now, I should say, given our media system, it's quite possible that large swaths of people are fine sorting these issues out in a kind of civil way, and that what we see is kind of the frothy, head of this. Uh, I was thinking of an analogy of like a beer being poured with like a head on top. That, the head is just is just this bubbly, ephemeral thing that's like passing, but the deeper thing that metaphor represents, that's a weird metaphor, but the thing that represents is something else that's happening, where people are coming into some sort of cohesion about different issues. I don't know if that's necessarily the case. I suspect that our way of understanding our country as a whole and our world as a whole is really flawed, and we're obviously really kind of grasping at straws as to get a sense of what's going on. But if we are taking the larger situation at face value, that there is a great deal of conflict and disagreement, and that it is being hashed out in various forms, which I think is true. I mean, I'd like to take the more optimistic view, but I think, yeah, that even if it's small percentages of us, it seems to represent a larger whole that is, has some sort of schism that it must necessarily get over, and reintegrate and grow. Um, so, whether it's political left and right, religious points of views, it just seems to be really consistent that people look at the opponents on those issues as not human, not worthy, people who ought to burn in hell or go to jail or whatever the case may be. People that, there ought to be laws passed to silence them or their point of view. Um, Actually, a particular example comes to mind, and I cannot remember the name of the person, and maybe this makes this a bad example, but it's a clip of a major news network interviewing a protester, where it was a Trump protest that turned violent, and I know there's probably quite a few of those, but just a fist fight breaks out, not anything really major. But the person who was on the left point of view who was being interviewed, oh, and I think the only thing I can tag them with, as far as a name, is I think the group was called By Any Means Necessary, which is really telling. I mean, that speaks to a philosophy that if you're willing to do something by any means necessary, then that implication is you don't care who you hurt. And I fundamentally disagree with that, but I don't necessarily disagree with the thing they're objecting to. So it's not as clear cut as it might seem. But uh, just to deviate from the point for a moment, by any means necessary is like the founding, or not founding, the like core philosophical principle of, like, let's to just give an example, like the Bush administration. I mean, again, that now we're getting into dichotomies of left and right, but just to use them as an example, and not them particularly, but just kind of that whole point of view as a whole, that um, if America needs to have its hand on the spigot for oil, then by any means necessary, get us into Iraq, and so if that has to be drumming up fake evidence of like nuclear, I mean, weapons of mass destruction, um, or some connection to 9/11 that we now know is non-existent, that's a by any means necessary kind of move. And so for like a left kind of liberal free well, I don't think they're really arguing for free speech, but um, they're arguing for the rights of people who they think are oppressed, and that's a worthy thing to do. But when you say by any means necessary, that means a whole lot of stuff that I think is part of the problem and not part of the solution. The underlying solution, my point being, is to look at people as fundamentally the same as you, with just a different set of experiences, a different point of view, but that they're worthy on the same level that you are, and that despite what we may disagree about, that they, I know it sounds strange, but you ought to wish them well, and that's not easy, and I'm not even sure I'm really explaining how you get to that point of view about something like that, but I mean, an example I can use in my own life is that extended members of my family are, the kind of people who, if you were to stereotype them, you would probably like slant them as like Trump supporters, or before Trump. I mean, yeah, it's so stupid. I go right to Trump. Just conservative, somewhat religious, or just if not family members, extended sort of community that I grew up in the suburbs in California. Like, there was a contingent of people who represented that point of view, and I still regard them in a positive way. And even the ones where I may disagree with their point of view, like, I still see them. I see so much of them as a human being because I've known them my entire life, that I see the good in them, and I can look at the things that I don't agree with, and whether it's a political or social, whatever. Like, I can see where they have room to grow. In terms of improving the quality of their consciousness, not to sound too judgmental, or the like I'm better than them, but I just set about doing this, and I think that's the only real difference between me and somebody who's very hateful. Which, by the way, I'm a human being. Like, I experience hate too, so I'm not trying to set myself apart. But I just mean somebody who is like really just kind of going headstrong into that point of view, and they are very hateful of others, and they hold grudges, or they just wish people ill. Um, and throughout my videos, and my point being is that is a weight that you carry that is not good for you, and that you actually benefit from lightening your load by forgiving people and growing past those experiences. And I'm not really going through the whole why of that, because that's in other videos, but um, to social disagreements, to political disagreements, to what you may view as somebody else's point of view as like the direct reason that somebody's being oppressed. It's like, there can be an element of truth to that. So it's like, it is serious. The words that people exchange are serious, and the ideas, and they can have real life consequences. So it's not to say that those things aren't important, but if you handle it with a loving point of view, you can navigate those things more easily and maintain your own sanity and benevolence and quality of consciousness while still having things that you object to as far as policy or social rules or trends. I don't think I ever got back to the point I deviated from about by any means necessary, but I think I made my point. It was just the irony of a person who's representing a kind of lineage of peaceful protest, being college students who are protesting a conservative political system. That has a history and a lineage, and particularly one that's informed by nonviolent resistance. So when you see, somebody who just takes a piss all over all that, that idea and that lineage by resorting to violence and advocating violence for, shutting down another point of view, it's like, that's not what it's about. I mean, you have your own take on what it's about, obviously, but that doesn't help. It doesn't move us forward. Not to be, too authoritative about any of that, because that's the whole thing I'm trying to get away from. But it's like, I can see in just 33 years on this planet, like, I can see the ways that philosophy of nonviolence and of unconditional love, even when you're protesting something, it gets us somewhere. Those efforts in the 1960s have paid off with certain significant differences now. Obviously, there's things that all are still ahead of us in terms of resolving. But my point is that progress came about because of people who had restraint and saw the bigger picture and had love in their hearts, and were willing to risk their own lives and did die for their beliefs, and they didn't fight back in violence. They fought back in resistance. And I don't know. I'm meandering, and this is getting long. All I will add is just that um, your entire experience in this world, if it's informed at all by your point of view or your quality of consciousness or the lens through which you're partaking of reality, it can only stand to improve when you forgive yourself and others, and when you let go of hate. And it's a cliche message that you've heard before, but if people just keep chiming that bell, keep keep that flame burning, whatever metaphor you want to use, um, somebody's going to be around to hear it, and it's going to hit at some time when it matters. So, good luck. Go in peace.